Anasazi disappeared. No one knows exactly why. They left behind abandoned buildings and their bones.
For 800 years, the textbooks said the Anasazi vanished, a peaceful farming people who built 5-story stone palaces in the desert, tracked the stars with terrifying precision.
But archaeologists and historians have viewed them as a model society. We know they cultivated maize and observed the stars.
Then walked away from everything they had made and disappeared. That was the official story for a century and a half. Then scientists sequenced the DNA still locked inside their bones. And the results came back wrong. Not slightly wrong. Wrong in a way that meant the Anasazi were never who we were told they were. And what really happened in those canyons has been hiding in plain sight the entire time. The lost civilization. To understand what the DNA was about to overturn, you have to understand what it was overturning. Chaco Canyon sits in the high desert of northwestern New Mexico, a shallow cut of sandstone about 9 miles long. No river, no fertile valley, no obvious reason, looking at it today, why anyone would build anything there at all. And yet, between 900 AD and 1150 AD, this empty stretch of desert became the political, religious, and architectural center of a civilization stretching across 90,000 square miles, larger than Ireland. Think about what that means. They built more than 150 great houses, stone structures rising up to 5 stories, some with over 600 rooms, with masonry modern builders still find difficult to replicate. Rooms aligned to track the sun and moon across decades-long cycles. A spiral petroglyph on Fajada Butte that marked the summer solstice to within minutes. They connected it all with roads 30 feet wide, running in perfectly straight lines for hundreds of miles. The roads climbed cliffs rather than going around them. This was not a scattering of villages. This was something organized. Then, around 1200 AD, it ended. The great houses were abandoned within a few generations. The roads fell silent. The population that had built one of the most ambitious construction projects in prehistoric North America simply walked away. For the last 100 years, the textbook answer was reassuring. A peaceful farming civilization, democratic, egalitarian, nearly utopian. They were given a name borrowed from the Navajo language. Anasazi, peaceful farmers, lost civilization, vanished people. Every sentence of that story was written before anyone could read the bones. The bones begin to talk. The technology that changed everything is more recent than you think. Ancient DNA analysis is exactly what it sounds like. Scientists extract genetic material from skeletal remains and sequence it against modern genomes. A time machine made of bone. For most of the 20th century, it was not possible. Archaeologists studied the Anasazi with pottery fragments and architectural analysis. The bones themselves sat in museum drawers largely unread. Then, in the 2000s, the technology caught up. The first study to apply it to Chaco was led by Douglas Kennett, an environmental archaeologist whose team pulled samples from Room 33 in Pueblo Bonito. Room 33 was a sealed crypt at the heart of the grandest great house in the canyon. Kennett's team had access to 14 of the individuals interred there. When the maternal DNA results came back, the room must have gotten very quiet. Every one of them shared the same mitochondrial signature. Every one, across 9 generations. For more than 300 years, the same chamber had been receiving the dead of one matrilineal line. This was a dynasty. Reed mats, turquoise by the thousands, conch shell trumpets carried up from the Pacific coast. The textbooks had described a people without kings. The DNA had just described a queen. Where had they come from? The signal from somewhere else. Here is where it gets harder to read. When researchers compared the broader Chacoan genetic profile to surrounding populations of the ancient Southwest, something did not align. The ancestral Puebloans of the wider region shared a clear, consistent genetic signature, detectable in nearly every skeletal sample across the 4 corners. But at Chaco, particularly among the elite burials, there were additional signals that did not match, signals that had entered the gene pool from somewhere else entirely. Something, or more accurately someone, had come in from elsewhere, and whoever it was had walked directly into the ruling lineage. The timing aligned with exactly the period when Chaco was transforming from a scattering of pit house villages into the most ambitious architectural project in prehistoric North America. Something had arrived around 900 AD, something that took up residence in the most elite spaces and introduced a new concept of how power should be organized. If your skin is starting to crawl, you are reading this right. Hit subscribe and turn the bell on, because what comes next about who arrived in that canyon is the part the cable documentaries will not show you. The DNA could point. It could not deliver alone. To confirm the source, researchers needed the cultural fingerprints that travel with human beings when they move, so they looked south. The canyon started speaking in an accent that did not belong to the desert. Macaw feathers from tropical Mexico. Copper bells from the Mesoamerican metallurgy tradition. Cacao residue identified in ceramic fragments. A plant that grows only in the lowland tropics more than 1,000 miles away. The signal was pointing toward the Valley of Mexico. Who had walked into Chaco around 900 AD? What they brought with them. This is the part where the canyon stops feeling like a place that grew on its own. The Valley of Mexico in the 9th century was a world coming apart. Teotihuacan, once the largest city in the Americas, had collapsed centuries earlier. The Maya in the southern lowlands were entering the crisis that would empty their cities within 100 years. The religious traditions of Mesoamerica, with their blood rituals and theocratic elites, were looking for new ground. At Wupatki, on the western edge of the Chacoan world, archaeologists found a ball court, not a version of one. An actual Mesoamerican ball court used for ritual games played across the Valley of Mexico for more than 1,000 years. There was no tradition of ball courts anywhere else in the Southwest. It had not evolved there. It had walked there. At Chitroquetl, a colonnaded facade was raised along a central wall, columns arranged in a row, exactly matching Mesoamerican temples hundreds of miles south. Someone later filled the columns in, as if the signature had become uncomfortable. Then came the teeth. Among the elite burials in Pueblo Bonito, researchers found a single-filed tooth, a specific style of dental modification, common across Mesoamerica and unknown anywhere in the Southwest. None of the surrounding populations practiced tooth modification, none. And yet there it was, in the grave of an elite Chacoan, carried north by a person born and raised in Mesoamerica. Around 900 AD, a small group from the collapsing Mesoamerican world had walked north. They were not refugees. They arrived with knowledge, architectural, astronomical, religious. Within a few generations, Chaco had been remade in the shape of the world they came from. But the architecture was the polite part of what they brought. The pattern in the bones. Here is where you may want to put down your coffee. For most of the 20th century, one physical anthropologist stood almost alone in trying to explain what the Chacoan bones were actually showing. Christy Turner had trained as a forensic consultant, working with American police investigating homicides. He knew what bones looked like when they had been treated gently after death. He knew what they looked like when they had not. When Turner examined the skeletal collections from Chaco, the bones had been processed, dismembered, broken, burned, scattered. The damage matched what Turner saw on animals butchered for food. He spent decades building a forensic checklist. 6 criteria. The first was burning on the backs of skulls, but not on the faces, consistent with a head placed on a fire while the brain was still inside. The second was anvil abrasion, the scraping pattern left when a defleshed bone is smashed between 2 stones to extract marrow. The third was cut marks at the joint endpoints, where tendons hold muscle to bone. The fourth was pot polish, a fine sheen left on bone fragments stirred inside ceramic cooking vessels. The fifth was fracture patterns consistent with breaking fresh bone, not weathered bone. The sixth was the systematic absence of vertebrae, the richest source of marrow in the human body, pulverized in nearly every processed assemblage. Applied to the Chacoan material, the checklist produced a result the field could not dismiss. Turner identified nearly 300 individuals across dozens of Chacoan sites whose remains met every criterion: men, women, children, infants, processed identically to the way. Chacoan hunters processed deer and rabbit. Even then, researchers argued processing did not prove consumption. The gap closed in 1997. At Cowboy Wash in southwestern Colorado, excavators found 7 individuals processed by every one of Turner's 6 criteria. In the hearth at the center of the community, they found something else: a coprolite, desiccated human feces, preserved by the desert climate, deposited at the scene. Biochemist Richard Marlar took the coprolite back to his laboratory at the University of Colorado School of Medicine and designed a test for a single protein, human myoglobin. Myoglobin is found only in skeletal muscle. The only way it can appear in human feces is if one human being has consumed the skeletal muscle of another. Marlar ran the test 6 times in triplicate, with every possible control. When the 6th result came back, Marlar later said he had to step away from the bench. Every result had come back positive. 90% of the processed remains were found in or near Chacoan ceremonial centers. The signature appeared in the archaeological record almost exactly when Chaco rose, and vanished almost exactly when Chaco fell. It was not the signature of starvation. It was not the signature of conflict. It was the signature of something organized. A small Mesoamerican-derived elite had brought the religion that had sustained their world for centuries. A religion in which the consumption of human flesh, performed by priests and sanctified by cosmic necessity, was the ultimate expression of power. Transplanted to the Southwest, it required only a small, ruthless elite and a terrorized local population. The Anasazi in this reading were not the cannibals. They were the subjects, the victims, a population held in place for nearly 3 centuries by a ruling lineage that had imported a system of religious terror from 1,000 miles away. And then, almost as suddenly as it had arrived, the system that had eaten them began to eat itself. The hidden ending. Around 1150 AD, the system collapsed. Tree ring analysis shows the Southwest entered a prolonged drought between 1130 and 1180. The agricultural foundation broke. Tribute stopped flowing, and almost exactly when the drought begins, the cannibalism signature in the archaeological record disappears. The system that had produced those remains for a quarter of a millennium ceased to produce them at all. The great houses were abandoned, not destroyed, not burned. The residents walked away and left their homes standing. By 1300, the Four Corners region was effectively empty. This is the moment the textbook narrative settles on: the vanishing, the mystery, the lost civilization. And this is the moment the narrative has always been wrong. The depopulation of Chaco was not a disappearance. It was a migration. The survivors moved south and east, following the rivers down to the Rio Grande, to the mesas where farming was still possible. They left behind the ceremonial centers of a theocracy that had stopped being worth preserving. For more than 6 centuries, the story of where they went was told only in the oral traditions of their descendants: the Hopi, the Zuni, the Acoma, the Rio Grande Pueblos. Traditions the academic world refused to treat as evidence. What ancient DNA has now done in studies completed over the last decade is confirm what those oral traditions had been saying all along. The Anasazi did not vanish. Their descendants have been living in plain sight the entire time, farming the same valleys, performing the same ceremonies, carrying the biological record of the ones who walked out of those canyons. But here is the part that does not resolve cleanly. The bones with the cut marks are still in the museum drawers. The numbered fragments are still being pulled into the light. The system that processed 300 human beings inside the ceremonial centers of the most ambitious civilization north of Mexico left a shadow that did not vanish when the great houses emptied. It is still being read out of the rock, still out of the teeth. The real mystery of the American Southwest is not what happened to the people who built Chaco. It is how long it took the rest of us to listen to the people who already knew. If this rewrote what you thought you knew about the Anasazi, drop a comment with the part that hit hardest. And before you go, there is another lost civilization whose DNA results were even stranger. That video is on screen right now.